5:23 a.m. Houma, Louisiana, March 18, 2026. The fog had come in off the intracoastal waterway before midnight and stayed. It settled into the freight yards along Barrow Street, collecting between corrugated steel walls and chain-link perimeters, swallowing the amber glow from the terminal cranes half a mile east. The service road that ran behind the row of industrial warehouses was empty, potholed, invisible at speed. At the dead end, a 60,000 square foot building sat behind a single guard booth that had not been staffed since November. 4 vehicles cut their headlights before turning into the north lot. 41 federal agents from the FBI's New Orleans Field Division and U.S. Customs and Border Protection deployed from 3 directions simultaneously. 2 tactical vehicles sealed the rear loading dock. A 3rd unit took the south gate. The primary entry team, 12 agents, went through the front entrance at 5:23 a.m. with a sealed federal warrant signed 14 hours earlier. 14 weeks had gone into getting here. The property manager was inside. He had arrived early to sign for a parts delivery that was not going to arrive. He was the first person detained, seated, cuffed, placed in the rear of an FBI vehicle before he could ask a question anyone would answer. The entry team moved immediately to the northeast quadrant of the warehouse floor. What they found there had been tracked for 98 days. 240 high-grade fiber-optic gyroscopes on wooden pallets, still sealed in original OEM packaging, covered in industrial shrink wrap. 96 inertial measurement units on a second pallet, cushioned in polyethylene foam, each labeled with a part number that had appeared on a Bureau of Industry and Security Restricted Goods addendum in November 2025. 412 GPS denied navigation modules in 6 aluminum-sided crates, outer documentation listing them as replacement parts for offshore oilfield service vessels. None of it had moved. The port transfer was scheduled for 3 days later. At 5:25, a second team secured a satellite office in Morgan City. At 5:28, a third team executed a search warrant at a freight terminal in Gretna, across the river from New Orleans. At 5:31, in suburban Houston, a fourth team knocked on a residential door. A man named Edouard Mayer answered it and was taken into federal custody without resistance. 4 locations, 4 principals, 8 minutes. It came down to one number in a shipping manifest: 38% too heavy. Bayou Marine Solutions had been in business since 2001. It occupied a narrow, unglamorous slot in the Gulf Coast maritime economy. Navigation hardware for offshore oil service vessels. Gyroscopes fail under sustained vibration. Inertial measurement units degrade in saltwater environments. The dynamic positioning systems that hold service boats on station during deepwater operations require regular part replacement, and replacement parts require a supply chain. Victor Arsenault, 66, had spent 11 years working Gulf platforms before he decided he understood the supply side better than anyone selling into it. He founded the company at 41, out of a leased warehouse in Houma, with 3 employees and a catalog of European and South Korean OEM contacts he had built on the rigs. He was right about the opportunity. By 2005, Bayou Marine had contracts with 4 offshore drilling operators. By 2012, 11. By 2023, the company held American Bureau of Shipping certification, the maritime industry's primary quality standard, and was listed in 3 commercial vendor directories covering the Gulf oil and gas sector. 6 drilling contractors named it as a preferred navigation hardware source. 2 independent audits in 2018 and 2022 examined the company's books, supply chain documentation, and export records. Both came back clean. It was a real business. Genuine customers, genuine certifications, a track record spanning nearly a quarter century. That was how it worked. That was the cover. Victor's son, Darnell Arsenault, 38, had joined the firm after graduating from the University of New Orleans in 2008. He managed procurement. Over 14 years, he had built direct relationships with every OEM supplier Bayou Marine used, German and Dutch optics manufacturers, South Korean navigation hardware firms, whose products were used on dynamic positioning vessels and high-seas service boats across the Gulf. He knew every part number, every lead time, every pricing tier, and every OEM compliance desk by name. He knew exactly how much a customer could order from each supplier before that supplier's internal compliance system flagged the purchase for review. Camille Thureau, 51, had come on as operations director in 2015. She managed shipping logistics, coordinated with the freight forwarder that filed Bayou Marine's export manifests, and handled all customs documentation. She knew the CBP automated screening thresholds for export manifests. She knew specifically the weight variation parameters that triggered secondary inspection requests on outbound container declarations. The fourth principal was not a company employee. Edouard Miller, 55, was a Houston-based commodities broker with more than 2 decades of clients in the marine and energy sectors. His connection to the Arsenault family, the task force would establish in the investigation's 7th week, dated to October 2024, approximately 3 months after the scheme's first procurement deviation. Beginning in the summer of 2024, Darnell Arsenault began placing over-orders with Bayou Marine's OEM suppliers. Legitimate client orders were filled as always. Correct part numbers, correct quantities, delivered on schedule. But alongside every purchase order, Darnell added surplus, extra units, calibrated to stay below each OEM's internal compliance review threshold, typically 10 to 15% above the documented client demand per order. Over 19 months, the accumulation was gradual. No single purchase looked anomalous from the outside. The surplus was staged in a dedicated section of the warehouse's northeast quadrant, separate from the legitimate inventory, tracked on a standalone hard drive with no cloud backup, invisible to any external audit or warehouse management system. When a consignment was ready to move, Thureau prepared the export documentation. The declared commodity code matched the legitimate parts. The controlled items, the gyroscopes, the IMS, the navigation modules, were listed under a vague catch-all, accessory hardware. The declared total weight was adjusted upward from the legitimate baseline, but not by the full weight of the additional components. Thureau had modeled the adjustment against CBP's automated screening parameters, calculating a number that would partially account for the extra mass without tripping a secondary inspection flag on routine processing. Her calculation was almost right. The declared destination on every shipment, Gulf Coast Navigation Partners, LLC, Dubai, United Arab Emirates. From Dubai, the hardware transshipped to a freight consolidator at the port of Bandar Abbas, Iran. From Bandar Abbas, it entered Iran's Aerospace Industries Organization's supply chain. Here is why these specific components mattered, beyond the obvious sanctions violation. Fiber-optic gyroscopes are a core element in the inertial navigation systems that guide autonomous loitering munitions in GPS-denied environments. The November 2025 Bureau of Industry and Security Export Control tightening had targeted this exact hardware class in response to intelligence assessments, documenting a specific procurement gap in Iran's Shahed 136 drone program. Following attrition and production scale-up in late 2024 and early 2025, Iranian Aerospace had been urgently sourcing high-grade gyroscopic and inertial measurement hardware through networks of European and Asian intermediaries. The components Bayou Marine was over-ordering from its OEM suppliers were on the documented list of parts Iranian procurement networks had been actively seeking for more than a year before the December container seizure. The first overorder came in summer 2024. No coincidence. They had built this on purpose, filling a documented gap more than a year before anyone made it illegal. December 4th, 2025, Port of New Orleans, 3:14 p.m., CBP Senior. Inspector Patricia Broussard had processed 19 outbound container declarations during her afternoon shift. The submission from Bayou Marine Solutions cleared automated screening without a flag. Broussard had a practice she had developed over 19 years at the port. During slower periods of a shift, she ran manual cross-references on repeat shippers, pulling current filings against historical records for the same commodity codes in destination countries. The system did not require this. It was something she did. She pulled Bayou Marine's history, previous declaration from the same shipper, August 2025, declared contents, identical commodity codes, identical declared quantity. Previous weight, 8,900 pounds. Current weight, 12,400 pounds. Same parts, same destination country, 38% heavier. Gyro compass replacement hardware does not change density. OEM packaging standards are consistent across production runs. A 38% weight variation on an identical declared load from the same shipper over 4 months had no legitimate explanation. She flagged it for secondary inspection. The container was held. Inside, the declared gyro compass components accounted for the documented quantity. Underneath them, in a second packaging layer of vacuum-sealed foam, were units bearing part numbers matching high-grade fiber-optic gyroscopes and inertial measurement modules. Hardware subject to the new BIS controls issued 6 weeks earlier. No export license in the documentation, no mention of the controlled part numbers anywhere in the manifest. Broussard seized the container. She filed her report at 6:47 p.m. By the following morning, the report had moved through 2 chains of command. By December 7th, a joint task force was operational under a sealed designation. FBI New Orleans, CBP's National Targeting Center, the Defense Security Services Export Enforcement Unit. The DSS presence in the initial formation was the tell. DSS handles violations with a direct defense technology dimension. Their involvement on day 1 indicated that someone in the intelligence chain had already identified where hardware of this type, moving toward Dubai on this manifest pattern, was likely going. Operation Blackline opened sealed on December 7th, 2025. Subscribe now. When this case reaches trial in the Eastern District of Louisiana, this channel will have it from the first day of proceedings. The investigation's first analytical task was reconstructing Bayou Marine's complete export history. The answer required 4 days of document work across CBP manifest databases and carrier records. 31 containers over 19 months. 27 had cleared port. 3 were in transit at the time of the seizure. 1 was the seized container. Agents ran the declared destination, Gulf Coast Navigation Partners, LLC, through every available database. Dubai Chamber of Commerce registration, active. Verified office address, a business center in the Jebel Ali Free Zone. Physical premises, a mail forwarding service with no employees and no actual operations. Registration date, April 2024. Gulf Coast Navigation Partners had been created 4 months before the first surplus export from Bayou Marine. Through international customs coordination, the task force traced the downstream path. The hardware from the cleared shipments had transshipped from Dubai to a freight consolidator at the port of Bandar Abbas. The consolidator appeared on a Treasury Department Office of Foreign Assets Control Sanctions designation from 2023, cited for procuring dual-use electronics for Iranian defense programs. The connection to Iranian Aerospace Industries Organization was documented in transit records recovered through a third-country counterpart inquiry. The circuit was complete. Bayou Marine to Gulf Coast Navigation to Bandar Abbas to Iranian Aerospace. 27 containers had already cleared. The hardware found in the March raid, the 240 gyroscopes, the 96 IMUs, the 412 navigation modules, was what had not shipped yet. The final accumulation, staged and ready for the March 21st transfer. The task force now had the circuit mapped. What remained was the financial architecture and the fourth principle. Both would take another 6 weeks to fully document. The surveillance phase ran from mid-December 2025 through early March 2026. Physical surveillance teams on the Houma warehouse, the Pelican Freight Terminal in Gretna, and the 2 satellite offices in Morgan City and Lafayette. Electronic surveillance under sealed court orders on the principal's communications. The teams watched and recorded. In the third week of January, the surveillance hit a complication. A panel van with no company markings appeared at the warehouse lot on a Tuesday morning. A vehicle not previously documented in any surveillance cycle. It was on the property for approximately 90 minutes before departing. Plates returned to a cleaning supply company in Baton Rouge with no documented connection to Bayou Marine. The task force pulled the cleaning company's registration, its client list from commercial records, and its tax filings. No link to any of the principals or to the export network. The decision was made not to intercept or approach. Expanded surveillance was maintained on the warehouse for 72 hours following the visit. The Arsenault family's behavior showed no deviation. The van was not seen again. The call was right. But for those 3 days, the entire investigation waited on something that never happened. I spent time reviewing the publicly available court filings on this case, and the detail that reframes the entire timeline is the relationship between the first over-order and the intelligence picture that preceded it. The initial surplus procurement from Bayou Marine's OEM suppliers, summer 2024, aligned exactly with a documented shift in Iranian drone procurement patterns that intelligence assessments were tracking in the same period. The BIS crackdown in November 2025 was a regulatory response to a procurement problem that the government already knew existed. The Arsenault family was not responding to the crackdown. They were already running when the crackdown began. This was not opportunistic, it was timed. In late January, surveillance documented a meeting at the Gretna Freight Terminal between Darnell Arsenault and Harold Trem, owner of Pelican Freight Services. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. The warrant terms in force did not permit audio coverage. When it ended, Trem's behavior over the following 72 hours showed no deviation from his established pattern. He filed paperwork. He answered calls. He went home. What Trem knew was a question the task force could not answer without approaching him. Approaching him risked exposing the investigation before the financial documentation was complete. The task force chose to hold. That decision cost 5 additional weeks. Those 5 weeks produced the strongest element of the government's case. Agents working the financial thread identified Edouard Meilleur's role in mid-February. Meilleur had been receiving cryptocurrency transfers from a digital wallet associated with a Cayman Islands business entity. He converted those transfers to wire payments and routed them into Bayou Marine's operating accounts, documented as consulting fees for marine logistics advisory services. The invoices were real documents with real project reference numbers. If you reviewed Bayou Marine's accounting records without context, the line items looked entirely standard. A mid-size maritime vendor using an external advisor for logistics consultation. The context that broke the structure was the correlation. Every payment from Meilleur to Bayou Marine aligned within a narrow window with the documented completion of a surplus export cycle. 19 months, 19 correlation points, $14.6 million. The most surprising element of what the investigators found wasn't the shell company in Dubai or the trans-shipment through Bandar Abbas. It was how precisely calibrated the financial architecture was. The cryptocurrency to wire conversion had been structured to survive the removal of any single node. The Cayman Islands entity was not the originating source of the funds. The money had moved from a second shell company in a different jurisdiction before reaching Meilleur's conversion layer. Whether the task force documented that second shell company's full upstream connections is not reflected in the public indictment. What the indictment charges is the circuit that was proven. The circuit that existed may have been larger. On February 19, 2026, a sealed court order froze $14.6 million across 4 accounts connected to the Cayman Islands entity and to Meilleur's personal holdings. The Arsenault family filed a new manifest for the March 21st shipment and continued operations. Here is what this case tells us about this particular moment in export enforcement. The November 2025 BIS crackdown happened because the intelligence community had already documented the procurement gap. The Arsenault family had already been filling that gap for more than a year. The regulatory response was running behind the operational reality. One inspector's manual cross-reference, performed against no specific protocol requirement, was the difference between the hardware reaching Bandar Abbas and the hardware sitting in a federal evidence warehouse in Louisiana. That is not a failure of the system. Broussard caught it, the system worked, but the margin was narrower than the system was designed to acknowledge. What do you think? Is this kind of operation the exception in Gulf Coast maritime supply chains? Or is it closer to the rule? Drop your red in the comments. By the first week of March 2026, the case package was complete. 4 principals fully documented, financial flows totaling $14.6 million traced across 3 jurisdictions. Shell company in Dubai tied to a sanctioned Iranian end user. Hardware confirmed present in the warehouse. Staged for a transfer 3 days out. The timing constraint was specific. Once the March 21st container cleared Port of New Orleans, the task force was in a different operational situation. The Dubai Shell Company had demonstrated over 19 months that it could receive and forward hardware without generating recoverable downstream documentation. The Bandar Abbas consolidator was on the OFAC sanctions list and had no cooperative relationship with American law enforcement. Once the hardware entered the Dubai to Bandar Abbas transit leg, recovery was not certain. The window was the warehouse. Everything pointed to moving before the 21st. On March 15th, the AUSA for the Eastern District of Louisiana reviewed the complete package and recommended proceeding. The following day, a federal grand jury returned sealed indictments against all 4 principals. 63 pages, violations of the Export Administration Regulations, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the Arms Export Control Act, and federal conspiracy and money laundering statutes. There's a paragraph in the indictment that sounds more like a technical spec than a criminal charge. It describes each control component by its export control classification number, its dual use category, and its documented application in autonomous navigation systems. The language is precise and institutional, but somewhere in that paragraph is the gap, what the manifest claimed versus what was actually inside. Translate that into operational terms, what those components do on an assembly line, and you get a case that moves up to the National Security Division. Arrest and search warrants were signed on the morning of March 17th. The operation was set for the following dawn. At 11 p.m. on March 17th, surveillance on the Houma warehouse documented a flatbed truck with a hydraulic lift in the eastern lot, a vehicle not seen in any previous surveillance cycle. Plates were run immediately. The truck was registered to a refrigeration equipment supplier in Baton Rouge. No connection in any database to Bayou Marine, the principals, the export network, or the Cayman Islands financial structure. 3 options: delay the raid, proceed with an added perimeter unit, attempt to identify the driver before dawn. Delay meant losing the pre-dawn window and creating synchronization risk with a simultaneous Houston arrest. Identifying the driver without compromising operational security was not achievable in the time available. The task force convened at midnight. The decision: proceed as planned, with an additional 2-agent unit added to cover the eastern lot during entry. If you've been following this case and want to see where the trial goes, hit like before we get to what happened when the gate went down. It keeps this channel covering federal cases like this one. Put yourself in the position of the agent who made that midnight call. You have 41 people moving in the next 5 hours, 4 simultaneous warrant executions across 2 states, a shipping date 3 days out that you can't let pass, and an unidentified vehicle next to your target containers. Everything you've trained for says verify before entry, but verification at that hour, without exposing the operation, is not available. You add the unit, you accept the risk, you proceed. The flatbed's driver was asleep in the cab when the perimeter breached at 5:23. He had arrived the previous evening for a delivery to a neighboring facility. He was relocated, identified as a witness, and released following a brief interview. He had no knowledge of what was staged 30 meters from where he slept. The entry went according to plan. The primary team moved through the north entrance at 5:23. 4 agents split immediately for the northeast quadrant. The remaining 8 cleared the office space and secured the property manager. The warehouse floor took 6 minutes. No resistance. 3 additional workers present, detained as witnesses. None were named in the indictment. In the northeast quadrant, the hardware was exactly where surveillance had tracked it. 240 high-grade fiber-optic gyroscopes, palletized, shrink-wrapped, part numbers matching the BIS addendum list. Each unit in its manufacturer's foam housing. 96 inertial measurement units, foam cushion, controlled class part numbers on every label. 412 GPS denied navigation modules in 6 crates, outer labeling consistent with oilfield replacement equipment, inner contents consistent with precision guidance applications and nothing else. Every unit documented, every serial number photographed, every pallet weighed and recorded. The 3 shipping containers in the eastern lot were sealed under federal custody at 5:31. At 5:25, the Morgan City satellite office secured. 1 employee present, detained as a witness. Computer equipment and shipping documentation seized. At 5:28, the Pelican Freight Terminal in Gretna. Harold Tram was not present. The dispatcher and 2 clerks detained as witnesses. All electronic filing systems imaged. Physical documentation files going back 24 months boxed and removed. In Houston, the 4th team had Edouard Mayer in custody at 5:31. He answered the door. He did not resist. Victor Arsenault, 66, was arrested at his Houma residence at 5:44, approximately 20 minutes after the warehouse team secured the building. He confirmed his identity to agents. He did not speak further. Darnell Arsenault, 38, was detained inside the warehouse office at the time of entry, an early arrival that broke his established surveillance pattern. He was in custody before 5:30. Camille Toureau, 51, was arrested at her home in Metairie at 5:51. 4 principals in federal custody by 6:22 a.m. The March 21st transfer was not going to happen. Here is the take that will probably generate some pushback. The export compliance burden in the Gulf Coast maritime supply sector falls almost entirely on small and mid-sized vendors with no dedicated trade compliance staff, no general counsel, and no systematic mechanism for monitoring Federal Register addenda to the export control classification list in real time. Bayou Marine Solutions held ABS certification and passed 2 independent audits. Its compliance posture was not unusual for its size and sector. The BIS control tightening that covered the gyroscopes and IMS Bayou Marine was diverting was implemented through standard regulatory publication. Whether CBP or BIS conducted any proactive outreach to high-volume exporters of dual-use navigation hardware following the November crackdown, any direct notification to vendors in this specific equipment category is not documented in the public record. None of that changes what the indictment establishes. The Arsenault family started this operation in summer 2024, more than a year before the November controls took effect. This was deliberate. It was not a compliance accident. But the next operator in this category will have the same structural gap available to exploit. The automated screening thresholds that Toureau modeled her weight adjustments against are not secret. The OEM compliance review thresholds that Darnell calibrated his overorders against are not secret. This scheme ran for 19 months, cleared 27 containers, and moved hardware to Bandar Abbas precisely because the compliance infrastructure on the American side was not calibrated for this type of diversion at this volume. Is this a structural problem that requires regulatory response, or does the responsibility fall entirely on the vendors? Drop your answer below. The indictment against the 4 principals was unsealed on March 18, 2026, following execution of the warrants. Victor Arsenault, 66, faces a maximum of 45 years across combined counts and fines of up to 3 times the value of the unlicensed exports. The indictment calculates approximately $43 million, representing the estimated market value of components exported over 19 months. Darnell Arsenault and Camille Toureau face comparable sentencing exposure. Darnell's role as the procurement architect, placing every overorder, managing the shadow inventory, Coordinating the consignment schedule with Meyer places him at the operational center of the scheme on every count. Edouard Meyer faces the same export-related charges, plus federal money laundering counts tied to the cryptocurrency conversion and wire transfer structure. His maximum exposure exceeds the others. The $14.6 million, frozen under sealed court order since February 19th, was formally forfeited to the United States Treasury on the date of the unsealed indictment. Harold Trem, owner of Pelican Freight Services, was not arrested on March 18th. He appears in the indictment as an unindicted co-conspirator. The investigation into what he knew and when he knew it is classified as ongoing. No timeline has been disclosed. One detail that stayed with me after going through the full case record: the OEM manufacturers who built these components bear no legal liability for where the hardware ended up. A German optics firm and a South Korean navigation hardware company each sold precision equipment to an ABS-certified, commercially listed American vendor with a 24-year track record. Both followed their own export compliance procedures. The parts left their facilities legally, were purchased legally, and were diverted through a documentation scheme that operated entirely on the American side of the transaction. In the OEM company's records, the Bayou Marine purchase orders will remain filed as completed, compliant transactions. The law reached the people who ran the diversion. It cannot reach the paperwork that records the sale as legitimate. Will operations structured like this one become more common as export controls tighten? Comment yes or no below. We read everyone. Subscribe to follow this case as it moves toward trial. When proceedings open in the Eastern District of Louisiana, 63 pages of indictment will be examined in open court. There will be more to report. 3 things were recovered on March 18th. The hardware, 240 fiber-optic gyroscopes, 96 inertial measurement units, 412 navigation modules, is in federal evidence custody. It will not reach Bandar Abbas. The money, $14.6 million, is in the United States Treasury. 4 principals are in federal holding, awaiting trial. 3 things were not recovered. The first, the hardware from the 27 cleared containers. The task force traced those shipments to the Bandar Abbas consolidator. What happened after arrival? How many components were integrated into production? How many remain in warehoused inventory? How many reached an active assembly line in Iranian Aerospace's Shahed program? Is not documented in the public record. That question has no public answer. The second, the identity of the Iranian side of the arrangement. The indictment names an organization as the end user. The individual or individuals who identified Bayou Marine Solutions as a viable conduit initiated the contact, structured the payment architecture through Meyer, and coordinated the supply cycle for 19 months. They are not named. Either the investigation could not build a case to indictment standard against specific individuals, or that thread is being preserved for a separate proceeding. The third, whether this was the only conduit. Iranian Aerospace's procurement gap for precision guidance components was documented before the November 2025 controls tightened. Gaps of that scale are not filled by one family firm operating out of one freight yard in Louisiana. The task force found one node. It documented that node thoroughly. What runs adjacent to it, through different ports, different OEMs, different shell company structures in different jurisdictions, remains open. The warehouse on Barrow Street in Houma is closed. The ABS certification is suspended. The satellite offices are shuttered. The Gretna Freight Terminal is under investigation. Gulf Coast Navigation Partners, LLC, Dubai, is dissolved. The 240 gyroscopes are in a federal warehouse in the Eastern District of Louisiana. The demand that was moving them toward Bandar Abbas still exists.